Hi, welcome back to the Strategy YouTube channel. The concept of fog of war has always been intriguing to me ever since I was a little kid. I was first exposed to the idea in RTSs like StarCraft, and I remember how unsettling and distracting it can be, constantly wondering what threats lie beyond your point of view and where you're going to be struck next. Later on in my gaming, when I played MOBAs like Heroes of the Storm, I started to realize the advantage information gives, and reminiscing about the concept of fog of war had me wondering, does fog of war exist in Magic, and if so, how do I build a deck around it? If we define fog of war as game mechanics which intentionally conceal or hide what our opponents have access to and what they're planning, then we could say that Magic inherently has a fog of war system. The fog of war exists both in the player's hand and in the deck. If we compare Magic to a game like chess where all of the pieces are available on the board and everybody knows what each player has access to, we can see that in Magic there is some concealment involved in the game inherently. Your opponents don't begin the game knowing what you have access to in your deck, and they also don't know what you have access to in your hand. In this way, we can say that the player's deck and hand are obscured in the fog of war. But is there a strategy or a mechanic that can move beyond that? The morph mechanic might come to mind as a good example of this. Morph creatures can enter the battlefield as a faceless, nameless 2/2 with no abilities, and players can reveal those creatures and access their abilities as they see fit. We can achieve something similar with the foretell ability, where rather than creatures on the battlefield, we have spells face down and exile that we can access later, all while maintaining a level of secrecy against all of our opponents. But fog of war works two ways. It isn't just an obstacle to hide our information from our opponents. Managing the fog of war involves collecting information ourselves, valuable knowledge that we can abuse to get the upper hand against our opponents. And it's at this point I think that we ought to address the commander of the deck, Corlessa, Scale Singer. This unassuming little 2-drop commander has two key abilities that we aim to take advantage of. Corlessa's first ability allows us to look at the top card of our deck at any time. Note that this doesn't reveal it to anybody else. Only we get that information. This is going to be great when taking advantage of the manifest mechanic. We're always going to know before we manifest if this is a card we want to manifest or not. We also always know what we're about to draw next turn. That information helps us to know if we ought to shuffle our deck or not. Something as simple as a fetch land can help us find our land drop or otherwise prevent us from getting mana screwed. Don't underestimate the power of knowing what's on top of your deck at all times. Corlessa's second ability allows us to cast dragon spells from the top of our library. This ability for a dragon tribal commander is admittedly sort of underpowered considering we're in Simic colors and have no access to red. In our deck, however, this plays a key role in how we're going to end this game. Corlessa is limited to casting only dragon spells from the top of our library, but notably we can cast the adventure portion of a dragon creature with adventure from the top of our deck, because adventure spells outside of the stack are always considered to be the creature portion, meaning while it's sitting on the top of our deck, even though we're casting it as an instant or sorcery, it's considered to be a dragon creature. And things really start to ramp up and get crazy if we play a card like Maskwood Nexus, which is going to make all of our creatures that we own even outside of the battlefield dragons in addition to their other types. The effect which turns our creatures into dragons applies to them even while they're sitting on top of our deck. So we can cast it for its morph while it's on top of our deck so long as it's dragon, meaning as long as we have the mana to pay for it, we can just keep casting morph creatures off the top of our deck, and our opponents aren't going to have any idea what these morph creatures are. Even if they looked in our hand earlier somehow, that doesn't help them at all. If we stall on the top of our deck and we don't have any morph creatures, we can shuffle the deck using those fetch lands, or we can otherwise manifest that top card of our deck in hopes that we can keep going. We're running a couple of ways to reduce the casting cost of our morph creatures from the top of our deck as well. This way we should realistically be able to move all of our morph creatures from the top of our deck to the battlefield each turn, and really churn through our deck quickly. In addition to that, we can also run some enchantments in this deck. The Theros gods are considered to be creatures while on top of our deck, though as soon as they resolve, they're likely just going to be legendary indestructible enchantments. These can often help us filter through our deck and clear the way for more morph creatures on the top. And if they get manifested somehow, all we have to do is pay their mana value and they will flip up. Another thing our deck has going for it is that all of our pieces have redundancies. Even our commander has redundancies, and these are actually probably even better than our commander because they can cast any creature from the top of our deck, not just dragons. Now you might be thinking to yourself, cool, this fog of war deck just turned into a weird, interesting morph deck. And in some ways you're right, but the spirit of this deck is not morph. It's concealing as much information as possible while exposing our opponents and gathering information on them. And that leads us to the final plan of this deck. We're going to play Zur's Weirding, or another card with a similar effect, to make all players play with their hands revealed. That way, all of a sudden, everybody can see what's going on in everybody's hand. We're going to lift the veil and expose everyone one, but our deck is going to break symmetry because we don't care if you can see our hand. We have the power to look at the top of our library and play cards from the top face down so others can't see, while everybody else is holding their removal and counter spells, watching each other and knowing they can't play anything. We're going to be filling up the board with mysterious little tutus, keeping our opponents entirely in the dark, making sure they have no idea what we're going to play or what we're going to do next. And our morph army doesn't have to stay as puny little tutus either. With Forsaken Monument, all of our morph creatures are going to be 4/4s, and we're going to gain 2 life whenever we cast one from the top of our deck. Ixidor similarly pumps the team while also making the price to flip our morph creatures reasonable. And I also managed to slot in some green and blue dragon tribal as well that fits our theme. They might be a little too weak for the format, but I just think these guys are cute and I always wanted to put them in a deck. The morph and other face down creature themes already surprisingly have some pretty good tribal support, so buffs to our team are pretty consistently available if we want them or need them at any moment. And they should hopefully make it so the face down morph creatures are value enough on their own that you don't need to feel the pressure to pay the morph cost and save all your mana for that just to get value out of the card. Morph creatures can feel a little clunky and stressful at times because of this, in my experience anyway. With our strategy having such a heavy dependency on having creatures on top of the deck to actually function, it's a no-brainer that we want as many creatures as possible. And by optimizing and making as many cuts for creatures as possible, we end up with a deck with 58 creatures in it, not including our commander, and 33 of them either have a morph or disguise ability, allowing us to synergize with putting them on the field face down. Still, the number's not exactly where I'd like it to be in the end. This deck is a work in progress, and like always, there's a link to the deck list in the description below. If you're thinking about building this deck, feel free to cut some of the morph creatures you don't like in favor of some morph creatures you do, though I'll warn you that the pool of morph and disguise creatures is not as robust as you might think. This deck would definitely benefit from another morph or disguise themed set. In addition to morph creatures and other creatures that have a dual purpose in the deck as lands or enchantments, I also included a couple creatures in the deck that are just value or otherwise fit the Fog of War theme really well. Eudora, Grave Gardener, for example, is a great include in this deck because she's going to allow us to reuse our morph creatures after they die. If you're not familiar with how this works, Eudora puts them back on the battlefield after they die as a forest, not a creature. But because they're face down as a forest, you can still pay the morph or disguise cost to flip them face up, and then when they're flipped face up, they become creatures again. Of course, the jig is up. As soon as our 2/2 morph creature goes to the graveyard, everybody's going to know what was on the reverse side, and they're going to know what the creature is. But still, we can put it face down as a forest, and then if we want to activate its flip ability again or get it back out there as a creature, all we have to do is pay the price. Not to mention, Eudora punishes board wipes really well by returning all of the morph creatures that just died as forests that we can again pay the price to turn face up and back as creatures. And I've also thrown Prognostic Sphinx in the deck, which might seem like a weird choice. What the Sphinx is going to do, however, is load up the top of our deck so we have exactly what we want at the start of our turn, and it can protect itself at the cost of discarding a card, which we won't care about anyway if our hand is being revealed to our opponents. Sphinx is a good way to convert cards in hand into value on the top of our deck, which is going to be really important if our combo is going off because cards in hand don't matter anyway. And for one last big surprise, I threw Panglacial Worm in this deck. As mentioned, we have a handful of fetch lands that are specifically there to shuffle our deck when it's optimal to do so, and to me, nothing screams Fog of War like casting a 9/5 trample worm out of your library when nobody expects it. I know it doesn't do anything for the morph theme or the manipulating the top of our library theme, but it's a really great trick up the sleeve which is going to surprise people and keep them on their toes and teach them why they should fear the fog. And that's going to be it for this deck tech. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to everybody who's patiently been waiting for more content. These last couple weeks have been pretty busy for me, and it sadly came down to an order of priorities. But even while I was doing those other things, I've been thinking about what I'm going to do with the channel and what videos I'm going to upload. So the good news is I have another deck tech video locked and loaded and ready to record. And in addition to that, I have a video I want to make on Pauper EDH or PDH. Moving forward, I want to add Pauper Commander to the list of topics we cover on this channel, and I want to start making videos on it semi-regularly. I understand that not everybody's interested in PDH and that this is primarily an EDH channel, and rest assured that's not going to change anytime soon. In my ideal for the future, I imagine every 4th or 5th video will be focused on PDH. And as a way to differentiate those videos from my regular EDH videos and make them stand out as distinct, I thought of the idea of maybe changing the background color to a nice green. So green videos are going to be PDH and the blue videos are going to continue to be EDH. I'm really excited to make PDH content. I already have a list of deck and gimmick ideas that only work in PDH that I'm excited to try. And I also see this as a great way to avoid avoid burnout before it even becomes an issue. If I'm feeling creatively stuck, I can jump from one format to the other and start brewing in there. And sometimes it's nice to just immerse yourself in another format. So yeah, stay tuned. I'll try to get those out at a reasonable time, and thank you again.